This is Frank Isola, and you're listening to Scoop B Radio.
You know the man. He doesn't need too much of an introduction. I'm kidding. Frank Isola joins us here, Sirius XM Radio, ESPN's Around the Horn, Pardon the Interruption, and Yes Network analyst. He joins us. Brother, what's going on?
I don't need an introduction. I might need a brush. I was running around today, so that's what I could use. What's up with you? Last time I saw you was at what was the net game I saw you at?
It was Nets Clippers.
Ah, we got to see one of the first James Harden games.
Tell me something. Do you think that James Harden and the Clippers can and will figure it out?
I think they can figure it out. You know, it's still early. I think the big thing for them is bringing one of those guys off the bench. And remember when James Harden was in Brooklyn, he preferred at times playing with the backups because he was out there with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. Then he could be James Harden when he's playing with four of the backups. So I think that's the way to go for Ty Lue. I mean, he would know better than me. You want to bring Russell Westbrook off the bench or James Harden? I actually think Harden would be better in a lot of ways. Put him in with 6 minutes to go. Take, Russell Westbrook and one of the other guys, either Kawhi or Paul George, and let James Harden kind of go to work. I think ultimately that's what's going to happen. What are they? They haven't won yet with the guy. I mean, they're going to win at some point, but it doesn't look good thus far.
You know, it's interesting. You would know this well, having covered the Knicks for years prior to all the TV and radio that you're doing now. You remember when Latrell Sprewell came off the bench and led the second unit and how magnificent that was?
Yeah, that's a good point. And that second unit back then, too, he had Marcus Camby coming off the bench, and I believe Kurt Thomas as well. So that backup group had a lot of energy, and maybe even Chris Childs, because I think Charlie Ward was starting at the time. I don't understand the whole, why some guys are so reluctant to do it, especially at certain points in their career. It doesn't take away from the fact that, for example, if you use James Harden, that he's had a great career. He's been an MVP in the league, but right now for this moment, it might be better. It doesn't mean he's not going to finish the game. Isn't the bigger thing finishing the game? That's really what it's about.
My late grandmother used to say, it's not how you start, it's how you finish.
That's right. And that's right. So that's advice you need to maybe give James Harden, maybe even give it to Ty Lue. Didn't we go through it with Carmelo Anthony on some of the teams that he played for toward the end? Obviously, Russell Westbrook went through it with the Lakers. I don't think it's the most insulting thing to tell a guy that's been great, who's now in his 30s, especially on a team like that. The balance of the team is just a little bit better sometimes. Instead of having all those scorers out there, bring one of those guys off the bench.
Yeah, I rock with that. I think that's an interesting assessment. Here's the follow-up to that. Looking at the early point of the season and looking how last year ended, can anybody legitimately beat the Denver Nuggets?
Yeah, and I think a lot will depend on, Jamal Murray is eventually going to come back. I give them a lot of credit, for beating the Clippers without Jamal Murray. He's been hurt. Jokic is still playing at a high level. And you know how it is, too. Once you win, guys like Michael Porter Jr. and Aaron Gordon, and I've even pulled Jamal Murray into the mix. I think when you get to those moments in the playoffs, they're not really going to be rattled because you do have a certain level of confidence. I wonder a little bit about the bench, especially when it does come playoff time, but we know how this works too. There's still a lot of time left in the season. Not only can those guys gain experience, but guys then become available in the buyout market. There's always a trade that could be made. But to your point, I think right now Denver still looks like the strongest team.
They are. And I think the reason why they look the strongest is because they have such a balance. Like, I was watching the Nuggets recently, and I said to myself, in this new era of basketball, in this new decade of basketball, the Joker is to Denver now what Draymond was to the Warriors last decade, as far as being a non-traditional point guard who facilitates to the point guard who's really the two, albeit you look at Draymond, what Draymond is to Steph versus what Jokic is to Murray. Have you in your lifetime ever seen anything like Jokic?
No, it's fascinating to watch. I think I always say, there are certain guys you definitely want to go pay to see play, and Nikola Jokic is one of them. For him to be that big, his vision is incredible. He's unselfish, but he could also score. He can shoot from the outside, and the way he does it in kind of this like lumbering way, there is almost something like it's weird. Like on the one hand, he might look like a beer truck going in reverse, like beep beep beep. But there's also some like beauty to it as well, just the movement and him knowing where everybody is, and you can tell his teammates love him. He's clearly a great teammate, and what I like about it, he doesn't really get wrapped up in what we tend to get wrapped up in. You remember the whole thing last year with the MVP stuff. He didn't really want to be bothered with it. And when all was said and done, he held up the two most important trophies. He was the championship trophy and the finals MVP. Those are the two that you really want.
Yeah, I'd rather be the NBA Finals MVP and a champion than be arguing over a regular season award. That's just me.
You're right. You're 100% right. I think that was his focus, especially after winning two of them. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to win it. And Embiid won it last year. Look at the way that Embiid started off this season. It's not like he's resting on his laurels. He clearly likes playing with Tyrese Maxey, and he's played at MVP level.
Jokic, to me, is the combination of Arvydas Sabonis, Magic Johnson, Rick Smits,
and
LeBron, as well as Tom Tolbert, all in one.
That would be some interesting baby if we could put all five of those guys together. But I'll tell you what, Sabonis is a good one, and LeBron, because they're both so big now. They're different sizes, but LeBron is built like a tank, and he's got like the great vision, the high basketball IQ. Sabonis was one of the best passers you were ever going to see. But I think what a lot of the guys, and if you start going down the road of Magic and LeBron and guys like Larry Bird, like the basketball IQ is off the charts, and that's clearly the case. Sorry, with Nikola Jokic. What I always find interesting about Jokic, and this goes for me back to scouting, and it's the most underrated part of the NBA. That's why everyone want to get a first-round pick, want to get a lottery pick. Well, you have to pick the right player. So the year that Jokic was available, a lot of teams passed on him. He ends up going in the second round, probably the greatest second-round pick in the history of the sport when you get right down to what he's accomplished. So there are great players out there, but that guy's basketball IQ, it's off the charts.
Oh, yeah. It's such a misnomer. I remember some years ago, there was a guy that I think it was Kentucky. Kentucky had like a 6'5" or 6'8", 300-pound quarterback. This was like decades ago. Remember that?
Yeah. What was that kid's name?
I can't remember.
Left-hander.
Yeah.
It wasn't Lawrence. Was the first or last name? I know who you're talking about, though. Big dude. You don't. If Zangief from Street Fighter played in the NBA, that's Jokic. That's one way of looking at it. I just love the fact that the guy, he clearly enjoys life. He likes being around his family. He likes being around his teammate. He really is a throwback when it comes to that. He just wants to play basketball. He doesn't get wrapped up in a lot of the nonsense, and you could just tell by the way that he plays on the court. And if you go back to last year in the NBA Finals, he has the great game one. Game two, he had 30 points going into the fourth quarter, and then Duncan Robinson came alive. Then after the game was, the Miami Heat have him figured out. They turned him into a scorer, not a playmaker. The very next game, he and Jamal Murray both went for 30 points and a triple-double. It's the first time in NBA history that two teammates had done that. So what could have been kind of a watershed moment for him, the series is tied at 1-1. You're going on the road to Miami. Denver's never won a championship before. And how did he respond? With a 30-point triple-double. That says a lot about him.
Oh, yeah. He puts up numbers. He is a fantasy basketball player's dream. Tell me something. Scott Perry, he said what every barbershop attendee was thinking, and he said it on television recently, that the Knicks were one star away or superstar away from being something special. Do you agree?
Yeah, I do. But the problem is it's hard to get those guys. So let's say, for example, Joel Embiid. Now, 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, before the season started, I think a lot of people think, Embiid, maybe it won't work out in Philadelphia. Now he's obviously having a great little run at the start of the season with Tyrese Maxey. But you got to get in most cases, a disgruntled star, because a lot of the free agents sign. Then you have to get that team to want to trade him to you. So a perfect example is Damian Lillard. Damian Lillard was ready to move on. He wanted to go to Miami, but Portland made a deal. They were patient. They waited and made the deal that they thought was best for them. So even though Damian Lillard got his wish, he wanted to be traded, he ultimately didn't go to the team that he wanted to go to. So that's the other part of it. So there could be a guy out there that the Knicks want. Maybe that guy wants the Knicks. Or he could talk to his agent. Could you trade me there? Maybe the team does it. But I don't know. I'll use Embiid as an example again. Daryl Morey is going to send Joel Embiid, 90 to 100 miles north to New York, so he's got to see him all the time. And what are you going to get in return? I'm not so sure they do that.
I think the Ben Simmons, James Harden trade was the last time in a little while that you'll see interdivisional trades like that.
Yeah. especially for players of that magnitude. And I think ultimately, if I was James Harden, he probably looks back at it now and realizes he just should have stayed in Brooklyn. He could have played with Kevin Durant a little bit longer, and if he was on Brooklyn right now, it would work out for him.
Oh, for
I
sure.
think.
For sure. For sure. Carmelo Anthony, in your Mount Rushmore of New York athletes, does he fit that?
In terms of all sports or Knicks?
Both.
Well, no. I mean, he's a great player, great guy, but I think ultimately it's still going to come down to championships.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have like, let's take the last 30 years for guys. Look at all the guys on the Yankees, guys on the Giants that have won. They would go ahead of Carmelo Anthony. And then in terms of all-time Knicks, you got to look at the guys that won championships. I'm not putting him ahead of Patrick Ewing. So he's in the same boat as Patrick Ewing, win a championship. Carmelo, what did he win? One playoff series with the Knicks, correct? Patrick
2013, right?
Yep, that was the big year. That was the year they played really well against Miami.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, they didn't get to play Miami in the conference finals because they lost Indiana.
They weren't checking LeBron and Wade and Bosh in that series at all.
I agree with you. Now the Knicks were confident that they thought that they could win, but I don't think anybody was beating LeBron at that time. I don't buy it.
Frank, what made you want to be a journalist?
Knowing that I wanted to be around sports and I probably wasn't going to play, so that helped. So when you kind of know what you want to do at a young age, when I was at Maryland, I worked for the student newspaper there. And back then, they used to give you money for writing a story. At the University of Maryland, we had a daily paper, came out Monday through Friday.
Mm-hmm.
So I usually wrote like 2 stories a week. That was $20, which for me was good. Then I started at the New York Post. I started at the bottom. I started as an agate clerk, like working late at night. And then I finally got a gig covering high school. And then from there, I went to college basketball, and then eventually the Mets and the Nets, and then the Knicks. But it was a way to be around sports. If you love sports growing up, and a lot of people like that today. I think today, for a lot of kids, they probably dream bigger in terms of this. I think a lot of these guys that know they're not going to be professional athletes can get jobs in a front office. They could become coaches, maybe even head coaches. Look at all the guys in the NBA that didn't play professional basketball. Look at all the NFL coaches that didn't play professional football. So I think like kids today, they even dream bigger than that, thinking of like a job, not just covering it, but actually being a part of it.
What was that moment where, you have different people that these days it's a viral moment, but prior to social media, there was a TV moment. It was an article. It was somebody commenting on an article that was written about somebody on TV. What was that moment? That moment in your career where you knew it was I made it or I crossed over? Because I made it was so subjective.
Yeah, I think it probably was on the Nick beat, and it probably was covering, that playoff series when they played Indiana. It was the game where Reggie Miller hit the 3-pointer, which I think was in 98, if I'm not mistaken. And, just like that moment, it was Reggie Miller. I thought the story that I wrote was good. I was writing it on deadline. To be able to like churn out a good story on deadline. Most reporters, first of all, you were working at night in the newspaper business. That's when you're being asked to do your best work. But that to me, I felt like after that, the game was so emotional. And I thought I did a pretty decent job capturing the game. And it's like anything. As you get older, you actually get better at it. Like even like Tom Brady, as he got older, LeBron James, athletically, they might have lost something, but in their head, they're actually smarter and better. That comes from experience. So that's the one thing about this business. As guys get older in my business, now they're looking to segue into television or to do podcasts. Like you're actually better as a writer the longer you go on and the more knowledge you pick up.
Who is a player, coach, or just luminary in sports that hated you as a writer that likes you as a broadcaster?
Oh wow, that's boy, I had a lot of guys that didn't like me. That's for sure.
I know.
I thought you were going to say what were the guys that I liked and liked me. I was going to say, well, Larry Johnson was one. Uh-huh. Jeff Van Gundy was another. I think they look at you a little bit differently because when you're on TV, it's just a different vibe. When you're covering a beat, you're there all the time. So, you're going to chronicle the good things that happen, but also the bad. And if you're doing a good job, I had somebody tell me this a long time ago. If somebody's not mad at you, you're probably not doing a good job.
Facts.
And especially when you're covering a losing team. Now, when I first took over the Knicks, they were a winning team and a championship contender. So the standard was so high that if they lost a couple of games, was it a little bit the sky is falling? And was that probably over dramatized? Yeah, perhaps it was. But that was a different way of covering. Then you're covering a team when they're winning games in 20 plus games a season, 30. The tone of the coverage is going to be different. And with all those losses building up, there's more pressure on the coach. There's more pressure on the players. And then the coverage kind of reflects that, and players get upset. I understand it, but what do you want us to write? That they tried hard? That's not what professional sports is about.
When you covered the Knicks during the first lockout, correct?
Yeah.
What was your day-to-day like without basketball then?
It was a lot different. So that year, I got to go. It was pretty interesting. So in October, I got thrown onto the Yankees a lot.
Oh, wow.
And thank the Lord, the Yankees made it to the World Series and played the San Diego Padres.
Yep.
So I got to go out to San Diego, and the Yankees won the first 2 games at home. They go to San Diego. They win game 3, and I'm rooting for the Padres to win because I want there to be an extra day in the series. I want there to be a game 5. Then, of course, Scott Brocious comes up, and, I think the ball that he hit is still traveling right now. The Yankees win that game. They're celebrating. That's when they started to bring the players on the field to kind of celebrate and do interviews. So we're on the field at Old Jack Murphy Stadium, and there's like these young guys. They're acting like kids. They were giggling. They're running around the bases. And it was Leonardo DiCaprio and all his buddies. I have no idea if Tobey Maguire was one of them. But Leonardo DiCaprio, I saw him round third and slide into home. This was back in '98. I leave San Diego and I went to Vegas because the NBA players and Michael Jordan was going to be there meeting to have a players union meeting. So I got to go to Vegas. From there, we did a lot. I remember we went to Atlantic City to cover. Remember they had that game. It was it was some kind of charity basketball game.
That's when Sean Kemp gained all that weight.
Exactly. And that's when Barkley. So we all a bunch of the New York writers. We all surrounded Charles Barkley, and Charles Oakley had been traded. He had gotten traded in June. And when we went up to Barkley and we said, we asked him about the trade, he was killing Charles Oakley. So at that famous Players Association meeting, when they were going to agree to the new contract, which I guess would have been in January when they agreed to it, that's when Charles Oakley saw Charles Barkley like right in the lobby and walked right up to him and just slapped him. That became the big thing. And then, of course, the season started early February. It was crazy. They signed the contract. Michael Jordan retires. I went to Chicago to cover his retirement. We got snowed in for like 2 or 3 days.
Wow.
Then the story comes out that the Knicks want Latrell Sprewell. The Knicks trade for Latrell Sprewell. Latrell plays his first preseason game. That year, the Knicks played 2 preseason games. They played the Nets in New York. Then they played him in New Jersey. When they introduced Latrell Sprewell, the crowd absolutely erupted, and he came bouncing. I still remember he had so much energy. He was just bouncing out because it had been like over a year since he had played an NBA game. And he came out like he was shot out of a cannon. And to be honest with you, he kind of played like that all year long. That was a 98 going into 99, and the Knicks making all the way to the finals in late June was a crazy season.
Yeah, it was, because it wasn't expected. And then the Spurs came out of nowhere. Tim Duncan was in year 2.
Yep.
Robinson and Popovich was on his, it was that was the start of that dynasty.
You're right.
Was on that team. Yep.
And Avery Johnson, if you remember too, the Knicks lost in 5 games. They almost won that game 5 to force the series back to San Antonio. In game 5, and this always happens at the Garden, maybe because they have so many events going on, the shot clock wasn't working.
Yeah.
So they had to bring out the old school shot clocks that they put on the court. So all of a sudden it looked like 1973 again. And Avery Johnson was the one that hit that big shot.
Yes.
Which pushed them ahead late in the game. It was like from the side of the court where Spike would be sitting, but probably more toward the baseline. Avery Johnson hit the biggest shot of that series, believe it or not.
Brian Scalabrine is part of at least the New York metropolitan area's folklore for his run as a member of the New Jersey Nets with Jay Kidd, Kenyon Martin, Kerry Kittles, and more. What do you remember about him as a player? Do you guys remember interacting, and how cool is it, or is it a full circle moment to now host a daily show with him on SiriusXM?
Yeah, thanks a lot for mentioning the show. Every morning, 7 to 10 on Sirius, Channel 86. Anyway, so when he played at USC, I was always big into college basketball. They're playing uh, at the Nassau Coliseum in the tournament. And
Mhm.
they had I always liked USC, the football team. I love the uniforms. So even as like a little kid, I always kind of liked USC. So I'm thinking, oh, it's cool that the basketball team's in the tournament. I thought Brian was like a light skinned black guy because he was dunking a lot. He was just like the way that he moved. He was, I didn't know what he was. I just thought he was a light skinned guy.
Right.
And then when he got drafted by the Nets, I said, oh, that's a pretty good player. And I didn't really get to know him much until he was on the Boston Celtics. Then I would run into him at games, and I ran into him a little bit at when he was on the Chicago Bulls, and then we hit it off. And I still don't remember how exactly it came to be that he came on the show, but I'm glad that he did because he's good on radio because he's got good opinions. He obviously knows the league, and he has a good sense of humor. He has a self-deprecating sense of humor. And he doesn't really get too wrapped up in people making fun of him or any other nonsense. Listen, was he an all-star? No, but he was in the NBA for a long time.
Yes, he was. He was a glue guy, and he
Yep.
fit. He fit, and he's a relationship guy.
Yeah, you're right about that. And he got the right relationships. His agent was Bob Myers. The
Um,
guys that he got to play with were Jason Kidd, Kevin Garnett, Ray Allen, Paul Pierce. He played for Doc Rivers. He played for Tom Thibodeau. He played for Lawrence Frank, Rod Thorne. He was around a lot of good people in the NBA.
you've been around a lot of good people too, but you bounce between Yes Network, Sirius XM Radio, and you're between Around the Horn and Part of the Interruption on ESPN. $1 million question: when do you sleep?
It's actually not that bad. The older you get, I never, on a beat, you'd get home from the Knick game at like, by the time I got home, it'd be 12. And I remember always sleeping a lot. Now, even on my own, I get up at 6:30 every day. For example, this week on a Tuesday, I had the radio in the morning till 10, conference call with ESPN at 10:30, got ready to go, went into New York City. I did Around the Horn, took the subway to Brooklyn, and I got there early because we were done by 3:30, and then I didn't have to be on the air at the Yes Network until 6:30. And last night I got home at 11:30. So by the time I left my house until I got home was 11 hours, and I had done 3 shifts. But it's only sports. It's not that important. It's just fun. You know how it is. You do a good job, and you're in it. Listen, we're all working hard. It's not to say that it's always easy, but it's always a lot of fun. All we're doing is just talking about basketball and sports.
I'll rock with a few more questions.
Yep.
Around the Horn with Tony Kornheiser and with Michael Wilbon and you. How easy is it to find that chemistry with those guys in alternating schedules from time to time?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting with those two. So newspaper people, by definition, are always pretty cynical. So we all
Yes.
kind of, yeah. So we all kind of get each other. People that are in the newspaper business, or were, I should say, you all kind of have the same sense of humor. Tony, obviously being a New Yorker, a Long Island guy, he has that sarcastic sense of humor. Mike is usually the butt of all of Tony's little barbs. And what's great about Mike doesn't really care. Mike lets everything roll off him like it's water. I mean, it's amazing how much he still loves sports, number one, and how much you got to see him around people that come up to him on the street. He could not be nicer. And Tony's the same way. They're fun-loving guys who I'm sure that they think, how did we ever get to this point in our careers? We had great jobs. We were columnists at the Washington Post, one of the top papers in the country. And now they've been on that successful show for over 20 years, going strong, making a lot of money. And, it's definitely changed their life. And listen, it's an honor to be able to work with those guys. It's fun. It's weird. Newspaper is stressful. I always felt like in newspaper, I got yelled at a lot. And maybe that's because I was younger.
Right.
TV, it could be stressful in terms of the time. Like I have to be on at a certain time, but the TV people at ESPN, like nobody ever really yells. I'm always waiting to get yelled at. I'd almost be more comfortable if I got yelled at. Everyone's just like so incredibly nice. You did well. You did great. I'm not Johnny Carson. I know I wasn't that good. Every once in a while, somebody could yell at me. It'll be okay.
You, I kind of sat back and just watched you do now in the arena for Nets games, as opposed to being in studio. I believe in Connecticut is where you guys were doing in pre and post. How big of an adjustment is that for you? And do you enjoy it because of the years that you spent doing newspaper?
You just nailed it. I like being there, and it's interesting, because you get to the game early enough, and I see famous people like Scoop walking around. But I did, I was on the, on the court the last few games, running into people that I covered when they were assistant coaches with the Knicks. I saw Lawrence Frank, had a nice conversation with him. I saw Brian Keefe, who was a Knick assistant, was a net assistant last year. So you get to run into a lot of people. There's league people walking around. I like that whole vibe of it because you get to, rekindle old relationships that you had with people maybe you haven't seen in a while, especially the pandemic had something to do with it. So I really enjoy being there. And the fans in Brooklyn, they're into the team. They're really nice. The people that work at the arena are great. So I never get stopped. I'm wearing a credential, but it's not like every 2 feet, whoa, what are you doing there? You should be over here. I like being in the arena because you feel like you're at an NBA game. You know how it is. I mean, you've been there too. It's just different.
How big of or good of an addition has Lonnie Walker IV been for the Brooklyn Nets?
He's doing good, and he's on a minimum. He's actually making less money than you are, believe it or not. It's still a lot, but for an NBA player, it's not that much. And go back and look at what he did last year with the Lakers. He had a huge fourth quarter against the Warriors in one of those games. I think he might have had 14 points. It was either 14 or 17 in one of those fourth quarters. He's been a huge. I can't believe that a guy like that. First of all, the Nets were smart to get him, but how did so many teams not take a chance on Lonnie Walker? You see him out there. First of all, he's so athletic. He seems really confident. But guess what? He started his career playing in San Antonio. So you're playing for Greg Popovich. They're going to do things a certain way. Then you go to the Lakers, and Darvin Ham is a terrific coach, but you also get to play with LeBron James. How are you not going to get better playing with LeBron? I think that's happened to Lonnie Walker.
You kind of dovetailed my question that I was going to ask as a follow-up, but I'll ask it in a different way. How much did you know about Lonnie Walker IV before he was a Laker? But besides the fact that he was just a Spur.
It's funny you say that. When he gets drafted, remember his hair, like he had like this incredible like head of hair. Mm-hmm. So when we saw him on media day, we interviewed him. And we were off. I didn't want to say this to him on the air. I didn't know if he'd get offended. I said, when did you cut your hair? And he told me, he said it was an amazing thing. He said that when he first cut his hair and he took a hot shower, he said he stood there for a half hour because he couldn't believe how good it felt hitting his scalp because he had so much hair for all those years. Like he never had that feeling. Mm-hmm. I knew about him. I didn't know that he was this good. Number one. Number two, he's a terrific guy. And he's really intelligent. He kind of understands like the league. He hasn't been around that long, but he's pretty sharp. He picks up on a lot of things. He sounds like a guy that's been in the league for about 15 years.
A lot of times in the NBA, point guards that are light-skinned get compared to that are triple-double threat get compared to Jason Kidd. In today's, you saw that with Lonzo Ball.
Yeah.
I think Lonzo Ball ended up being his own guy when healthy.
Yeah.
Comparatively, do you think that we're in the day and age now where you see 6'8", 6'9", LeBron or Ben Simmons like players, and we're just often comparing them to LeBron and Ben Simmons? Like when Ben Simmons first came into the league, did you compare him to LeBron or did you see somebody else?
Yeah, I think I didn't see LeBron, but you did hear that comparison a lot. If you remember, the big thing was everyone was going to, he's the next Michael Jordan. It was Harold Miner was going to be the next Michael Jordan. Grant Hill, when he was coming out of Duke, a lot of people thought that he was going to be the next Michael Jordan. That seemed to be the prototype. I think you're right. Then we looked at a lot of point guards. But, that puts a lot of pressure on anybody to say he's going to be the next LeBron James. It's just a different – that's a once-in-a-lifetime generational player. And it spans, from Michael Jordan, Kobe's in there to LeBron James. But, when I see a lot of players, I don't say that because, like, LeBron got better at three-point shooting as he got older, but he also knew how to win. It's just, LeBron talks about himself a lot, and sometimes people roll their eyes, but he's 100% right. He had the one quote where he said, "I have a big basketball brain." It's really true.
Yes.
I mean, he's just that much smarter than a lot of players. So you put the combination physically, how he is, the skill level, but then also the brain. So and then the will to win, which is also part. That's why I think, I got to be honest with you, I think of Tom Brady and LeBron a lot because I just think they've done it at such an older age when most guys weren't doing it like that, and they were still winning, and I think they were winning a lot with their heads.
But LeBron, to me, The only criticism I had of LeBron early in his career was that he bit his nails on camera, and he stopped doing that. I think he was so mature early in his career.
Yeah.
I've had this conversation with Grant Hill, and I'll take that and I'll raise it and I'll ask you: was Grant Hill, maturity wise, skill set wise, LeBron before LeBron?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. His body, he's a lot leaner than LeBron is, but maybe if he played in today's NBA, he'd be a little bit bigger. But I remember, I'll give you one. I remember being in Indianapolis at the McDonald's All-American game. I was there for a couple of days. New York, there were a bunch of New York City kids in it that year. It was like Khalid Reeves and Derek Phelps, Brian Reese, they were all there.
Mm-hmm.
And Grant Hill was there. John Wooden gave at the dinner the night before. John Wooden was the speaker. It was tremendous. But I remember being in the hotel lobby, and there was Grant Hill on the piano. So like Grant Hill was like a dual threat. I mean, a multi-threat. He was a good-looking guy. He could play basketball. He could play music. When the McDonald's All-American game was over, I remember going back to the hotel, and who did I see standing in the lobby? Michael Jordan, because the Bulls were in town to play the Pacers the following night. So it's pretty cool. I went from seeing Grant Hill to Michael Jordan. But I think you're right. Grant Hill, people don't realize it. Grant Hill was a huge winner in college, and the sky was the limit for him. And then he had those ankle injuries. You know, when he eventually came back from the ankle injury and became an all-star. I think it was with the Phoenix Suns. But there was a point there where you didn't think Grant Hill was going to play basketball anymore.
Frank Isola joins us. You can catch him daily on Sirius XM NBA Radio with Brian Scalabrine. You can catch him doing pre and post over Yes Network for the Nets. And you can catch him on ESPN on a PTI as well as Around the Horn. Before I get you up out of here, I got to ask you this. I ask everybody this, and you are the latest subject.
All right.
I need you to give me your funniest and or endearing interaction with Michael Jordan.
Oh, oh man, there actually might be a few of them.
We got time.
I remember I was covering high school. I remember going into the locker room in New Jersey, and he was there, and I was asking him about Brian Reese, who was at Tollentine, and everybody thought that Brian Reese would be the next Michael Jordan. All right, we're young back then, so we don't know. But Michael Jordan, I remember him looking at me and said, just because you could jump doesn't mean you're Michael Jordan. And I was like, all right, I understand that. But the best thing about Michael Jordan, so All-Star Weekend, Michael Jordan was the first to do this. He wouldn't show up on Friday for the media availability. Every player in the league, name the player, they would be there for media availability. Michael Jordan would go play golf somewhere. He'd then show up in the city of the All-Star game late Friday night, early Saturday morning. He would then attend practice. And when he had attended practice, he would have the big media scrum around him. And when I was covering the Knicks, the New York writers, we'd all get around him, and we would start peppering him with questions about the Knicks. And he was waiting for us. He'd see us, and he'd kind of smile because he knew exactly where we were going. And we'd ask him, do you view the Knicks as a threat and this and that? And he would just start, nah, they're not a threat. I'm not worried about the Knicks. The way that he was, and he would kind of wink at us as if to say, go write your story now. You got what you wanted. That Michael Jordan said that the Knicks aren't a threat. He knew. That's what I loved about Michael Jordan. When you covered him, and I covered the last 3 years, I was at all those finals games. He was always the story. If he had a great game, obviously the story. If he didn't have a good game, he was the story, because the very next game, he was going to have a good game. Mm-hmm. That's what was amazing about the guy.
Frank Isola gave us the digital version, the TV version, and he gave us interpersonal stories. You gave it to us all, brother. Thank you so much for your time.
Scoop, good seeing you. I'll see you around the basketball arena soon, all right?
You will.